Hello and welcome to a stream crossing. This is the Solid Ground / the Deep End live stream with my wife, Leslie Elliott Boyce, and Jennifer Friend. They usually have on their channel right now, you're listening to it. So the people who we split are now going to have both of us open in both screens because they want to attend both streams. But it's all the same stream. We're also on X on my channel. So so we're gathered here today to continue discussions mostly about gender and sexuality. For some reason, we keep on getting caught in that loop. And then also we dip our toes into liberalism or post-liberalism, whatever that is. But I'm open for anything. Trump just got inaugurated. He had a banger of a speech. Did you guys get to check that out? It just wrapped up now.
I didn't. I'll watch it later.
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen it.
He did a whole bunch of flexing.
Yeah.
Let us be
what kind of flexing?
Compassion, courage, and exceptionalism. He basically declared war on Panama. He's going to take back the canal from China. And we're going to Mars. We're going to Mars. And he's opening external revenue service where he's going to try to switch over the government's income from us to foreign nations. And there are some tack-on effects for that. We'll end up paying either way, but maybe paying a little bit less. His big thing is tariffs. I am not an economist, so I don't know how that's going to impact us.
It'll be interesting.
I'm not a Trump enthusiast. I'm cautious, but we'll see. But I'm also not freaked out. It'll be what it'll be.
Yeah. There is a bit of a delay. I might be able to change that a bit. But what else is on your mind?
Lag is weird.
How has your discussions on your channel been shaping up, and what were you guys at what point in the conversation, and what conversation have you guys been working on over there?
So many things. Jennifer, do you have a way of summing it up?
Oh my gosh. No, not really. We've been talking about female sexuality, female experience of growing older as female. We talked about fires and not sexual fires, but the unfortunate fires in California.
Sexual fires. That's more exciting.
That's a much more pleasant subject than Los Angeles.
Yeah, we I guess we've talked about all kinds of things. Sometimes we have guests with us and then we just branch out in different directions. But you sent us an article this morning, Benjamin, before we came on. That's interesting. It is an article by, let's see if I can find the name of the author. Kat Rosenfield, yeah. And it is on what women want. And this is about Neil Gaiman and the women who have accused him. So this is very interesting. I don't know if everybody's up to date or up to speed on the Neil Gaiman thing. Benjamin, do you have a Cliff's Notes for us, for anybody who's not?
Yeah, Neil Gaiman is what's known as a male feminist. He originated from the 1990s, late 80s, 1990s Vertigo Comics, which was an imprint of DC. He did the Sandman series, and then he branched out very successfully into script writing for Hollywood. There's several actually very well-constructed films. He's really good at that job that he does. He actually retweeted me once, probably in 2019, when I interviewed one of his author friends, Stephen Brust, who is one of my favorite science fiction writers. But Neil has since, there was this whole hashtag #MeToo event that happened over 2018, I think 2017, where many female spoke up about the sexual and emotional abuse received kind of quid pro quo for fame. Most notably in the Harvey Weinstein, as opposed to Weinstein, some guy with mutilated genitals, and he revolutionized the Oscars to use the Oscars as a publicity platform. It's really interesting what he did to shake up the industry. He was the head of Miramax. And so Neil Gaiman during that period was doing, believe all women and it's women's time to shine, or women should be our overrulers. But then it came out rather recently that he has been engaged in relationships with his babysitter, people who, women specifically, who were his renters, and using the power dynamic between him being an established go-getter to extract what appears to be rather humiliating favors of a sexual nature from these women, up to including licking their poo and things like that. And what this article came out interviewing one of the subjects of his abuse details is that this young woman had an affair, and in the text relationship, she was always glowing about it and very favorable to him. And then in retrospect, she's now said that she was at a loss. Like, she didn't actually want that. That made her feel really bad. But in the moment, she was propping up and praising him. So it seems like there was, some retroactive regret, but present shame. Who knows? Then Kat Rosenfield, I'll have to ask her when I have her on later this week. She wrote an article, which we can get into now, discussing the very interesting dynamics of regret and hypergamy and gynocentrism that is kind of two-faced and are hypocritical, where women can tend to play the victim, but then that kind of degrades their agency. Like, can you trust somebody who changes their mind, or who is always under pressure from external circumstances? Like, to what degree is that a something that society can hold that contradiction? So I'm interested in hearing if you guys want to quote the article or just riff on what you read from the article. I can link it in the chat.
Yeah, it'd be great to link it for people to read. I haven't read the whole thing. You just sent it to us this morning. I read part of it, and I'm interested in the rest. But what she's sort of setting out here, and I'll read a little bit of just the beginning here. Neil, did you say it's pronounced Gaiman? I didn't know how to pronounce
Gaiman.
it. Okay, Gaiman. Appears to be a pretty bad guy, and she links to this expose on him.
And
That's
Vulture, I'll put
not
that
actually
in the
what
chat
this...
too.
Okay. She says, that's not actually what this essay is about, but I know people are going to ask, what about the man? Are you defending the bad man? So let's just get it out of the way. The bad man is so extremely bad. He's so bad that I don't even care if he broke the law at this point, if the best defense for your behavior is, but she consented to eating her own shit and vomit. If you find yourself saying anything even in the ballpark of that statement, you either need therapy or Jesus or both. Neil Gaiman gets a big thumbs down from me. He gets 0 stars. I would certainly not have sex with him, and I don't think you should either. And then, so she's going.
Don't worry.
Yeah, right. She's just setting out that this guy is. She's not defending his behavior, but then the woman who accused him of rape, according to this article, Scarlett Pavlovich, said he said to her when he found out she was going to accuse him of rape, I thought that we were a good thing and a very consensual thing indeed. And she responded back, it was consensual and wonderful. But then her case goes on to say that she was not actually fully consenting, maybe because she had complicated feelings about it or felt the need to please him, or for some other reasons, her consent that she gave was not valid. So I guess that's the premise from which we're discussing this.
Mm-hmm. If I may, Jennifer, did you want to jump in? I was going to read a little bit more of it, but if you had thoughts.
I had a question, actually. I don't know if I missed this in the article. What was her relationship to him other than sexual partner? Was he in some kind of position of authority over her in any sense?
She was, there's two. There was a babysitter / like renter. What's it called when you rent from somebody? Rentee situation. Tenant. Yeah. And then there is just like a young fan. They met when she was, 18, and then they initiated a liaison later on, a couple years later. Oh, no, wrong one.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. This is This is very interesting because I think that sexuality and sexual relationships are so complex, and that there are reasons why people engage in things that they feel ambivalent about, and over time come to perceive differently than, when you did the cost benefit analysis at the moment, later on you feel quite differently about it. I think that's, and what's interesting is sort of trying to put a pin legally in which of those perspectives that you've had during the course of your own experience with this person or this relationship is the valid one.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think it's possible for somebody to engage in behavior consensually that ends up being something that was not healthy for them and that was indeed traumatic and harmful. And that person, deserves empathy and deserves help with healing from that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the behavior was, criminal. I,
Criminal.
Yeah, like you could have a very unhealthy sexual relationship with somebody without it being something where you were actually raped and it meets the legal criteria for that. Does it still need to be addressed? Absolutely. Like the person probably needs therapy, they need the support of their friends and family, but it doesn't mean that every harmful sexual experience falls under the category of rape.
Mhm. Mhm.
This
I
is
think it.
oh, sorry, Lele.
I was just going to say, I think one of the questions here is about consent-based morality and consent-based legality. Like, at what point are you engaging in things that we should not be asking one another to engage in? And at what point does, like, if somebody's cutting you for their thrill, but they can pay you enough that you'll say okay to that. You've consented to it because they're going to pay you. Well, I'll pay you $1 million if I can cut into your skin, and that'll give me a thrill. Well, okay, I'll take the $1 million. But have I now sold something that shouldn't be legally, ethically, morally allowed to be bought and sold?
And what recourse should you have?
That's a good question.
I mean, there's the court of public opinion, and then there's civil court, and then criminal court. And we're saying, well, this isn't criminal, this is probably civil, but there's also the community court. And at this point, there's so many different vectors of, there's this meme that goes around, this 4chan meme that goes around. Grow up in 1980s, be sexually attracted to toasters. Comes out that I'm sexually attracted to toasters, everybody beats up on me, and I change my behavior. Grow up in 2010s, be sexually attracted to toasters, go online, find a community of toaster fuckers, and then watch my life degenerate, right? So there's this niche community allowance because there are so many people of so many different stripes being able to meet and adulate themselves and justify and rationalize their behavior. I think Rosenfield talks about the BDSM culture. Yeah, it's a culture now. It's not a, I mean, don't yuck my yum kind of stuff, but a kink or a perversion isn't, it's no longer necessarily a perversion because there's no road that's common from which somebody can dictate what is a discrepancy or a offshoot of the straight and narrow road. I mean, we all kind of supposedly know that, but we all have predilections that aren't something that we're going to share. But if we can share them anonymously and foster them in private or in smaller groups, then they kind of take a life of their own. And one supposes that this is just like the fallout of mass communication, mass social communication, all these nodes.
Yeah, student of rhythm says, is it from people trying to erase the stigma and break down the barriers of shame, both of those phrases in quotes, about sexuality? No more judgment for stuff that's obviously nasty and degrading. Georgina says something shouldn't be able to be sold. And Cody R says, yep, it's way too easy to find your little echo chamber and never leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that that's really the it when I come back to this a lot because it's really it's something that I continue to be dismayed by in seeing how this plays out in popular culture and in popular psychology. It was a human sexuality course that I took a couple of years ago in a graduate clinical mental health counseling program, where pretty much the word normal is the offensive thing. The word, the thing that we were over and over told was wrong was heteronormativity, cis heteronormativity. And so there's kind of an elevation of everything that isn't that to this, like when you're saying there's no path from which there's no reference point that provides this path of what is normal or healthy or most in line with human flourishing, so that we can see when we've deviated from that and talk about that in a particular way. We're not able to do that anymore because everything is elevated to the level of this is fine. The only problem is how you think about it. The only thing that's wrong with it is your own. If it's causing you shame or something, work on the shame. It's not about the act.
Well, I mean, that's a really interesting side effect of the psychological profession. Once we professionalized, which you both do, and we talk about this, and even as an interviewer, I can see this process of normalizing something that shouldn't be normalized when you are interviewing a subject, let's say, or speaking, or counseling or coaching somebody who has a predilection that's destroying them and destroying their family. Let's say I have an interview with Jamie Shupon. It's probably one of my most heartbreaking interviews, and he is a autogynephile, self described, and then in his behavior, addiction to pornography led him on this whole quest, and it just ate him up from the inside. And I interview him twice. One time where he's, backing away from it, and he was the first legally non-binary citizen in the United States. So he's a part of the process of normalizing this, instituting this into government and then into popular culture. And when you talk to the sexologists, Zucker or Blanchard, who are just studying this stuff, or the psychologists who are working with people with this situation, they take a neutral point of view on somebody's situation. That's the best way to deal with somebody, is to not let your own biases and moralities interfere with connecting with them, seeing the world through their point of view, and then guiding them into a way where they can make their own decisions about their behavior. But once that escapes the lab and says, well, okay, the sexologists study this behavior, they codify this behavior, and then it becomes just a data point. And then the government, with its mandate from the people, or at least certain people, to end all discrimination, then start to take this data and then install it into law. And then culture comes along too and says, don't yuck my yum, or don't yum my yuck. That's the tug of war. Somebody just wrote that in chat. Don't, I'm not supposed to yuck your yum, but don't turn my yuck into a yum. Don't do that, And so there's that tug of war going on there. But with Jamie Shoup, my best course of action in interviewing him is to not judge, is to just let him speak his story and prompt him to discuss where he's from. And through the process of him opening up, by me not imposing my moral judgment, and the same thing with any ideological interview where it's not about my point of view, it's about the subject's point of view, and just letting them express it and trying to get them to express it in the best way possible. That mode of being, that professional mode of being, is proper for certain situations. But when it becomes the baseline for everybody in society to always be value neutral, to never impose shame, then society goes off the rails, because then you have people with, like, the predilections that are the strongest are what prevail most. And so, but oddly enough, not necessarily. If somebody's a prude, the prude is what is shamed, castigated, and put aside. But then you could also make the argument that wokeness itself is basically a bunch of theories and points of view that were taken up by a prudish set who could have been prudish about something else. It's just Puritanism, but it's with this hyper-progressive point of view, but it's still prudism. Like, don't be offensive. Don't do this. So it's still that kind of way of being a prude, but it's just spun in the opposite direction. So you're always going to have people being prudish. But as a professional interviewer or a counselor, your prudism is counterproductive to that point of view. And once that becomes the standard for all of society, I think it's a problem.
I don't think that all of society should be walking around as if they're in a never-ending therapy session. I don't think that's our proper function and role in each other's lives. I think if a friend could say to you, "Hey, that's fucked up. Don't do that," and you can still love the person, but say that their behavior is screwed up and give somebody a hard time. And I don't know. I gotta say, I don't necessarily understand the reason behind this strong desire that people seem to have to kind of, like all the talk about, oh, we want to queer education. We want to sort of make everything within the kind of window of acceptability. What I don't understand why people feel this need to have everything they do sort of given an official stamp of approval anyhow. Why? I don't get it. I mean,
This is
There
something I've been
is,
wondering lately too. Is I've been just
because it's
thinking,
very
where
it's
did we
very prevalent.
where did we get this idea that we all need to be able to change the world? Like, why? What arrogance on the part of the individual that everybody should see things the way that you do? Why is it not enough to just be able to claim your little spot in the world? Why change the world? Why queer all of education?
yeah.
Because you need to see your own opinions and lifestyle choices reflected on the broad, at this broad scale. I I
Yeah.
think that is a really interesting thing that's happened with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really get it. I mean, it's like
That's,
queer by definition is something that's sort of odd and outside the norm. And so if you normalize it, well then what will be queer? And if you take some ego satisfaction in being a little different or a little risque, how are you going to get that
Mhm.
when all of society has completely embraced it and nothing's odd anymore? I don't understand what's the end point, and why do you have to have everybody approve of every sex act and every decision you make, that all of society has to applaud it and the church has to applaud it? I mean, it seems to me rather cowardly. I think if you really want to do something and you really find it meaningful and enjoyable, then do it and let people have their opinions about it. Why does everybody have to agree with you?
Well, I guess in the case of the Gaiman story, there's some things that seem like there's enough hesitation and ambivalence around these things. Like I just watched this video, speaking of consent. Somebody, I don't remember who put this up. Maybe it was Genevieve Gluck. She posts a lot of stuff that are anti-porn, kind of anti this really debaucherous consent-based
Yeah,
sexual
she deals
morality
with some
stuff.
really toxic stuff.
She does, and I think she has a really good. I like her perspective generally that she puts out. Um, it might have been on her Twitter. There was a video of it was a very obese person speaking. I think it was a
Was
woman
it Meg
who was.
Galasso?
Isn't that a funny name? But no,
It's from
that's
the
the
Fat
woman. That's the
Librarian
librarian.
show.
Yeah, yeah. That is kind of an unfortunate name if you say it fast. Um, but no, this was a person sitting, and it's interesting to me that with Planned Parenthood, and I'm not making fun of obesity. There are plenty of heavy people who are beautiful and sexually vibrant, but this is just interesting. Like the Planned Parenthood spokesperson for sex is this. It looks like a Pat impersonator from Saturday Night Live. This woman who's super androgynous and super heavy, and she's talking about fingering anuses and things to little kids in a classroom setting. It's just this bizarre thing. If you haven't seen this video, you should check it out. It's Planned Parenthood. They're talking about what is virginity, and then she's talking about all the different ways that a person could lose their virginity, even to themselves. And she's going into these really, in a classroom with like ABCs behind her in this very like childlike classroom,
Oh
and
no.
talking to
Yeah.
kids, but about really explicit stuff. And you have the spokesperson that is like a really almost an asexual person. Anyway, sorry, that's maybe too much commentary. But so this, going back, this woman that I'm referring to in the video, she says, we, if some, we should destigmatize these acts, these questionable sexual acts. I don't know what she calls them, because maybe there's just a market for that. Maybe there are men who they want to perform sex on unconscious women, and so they can find a woman that they can pay, and she'll be okay with that. She'll come over, and he'll pay her, and then she
Speaking of
can be
that, today's
drugged,
episode is
and he
brought
can
to
have
you
sex.
by Pudding Pops.
Thank you, Bill
Tastes great
Cosby.
with Rohypnol.
Thank you, Benjamin.
But her point was that nothing should be off the table. Just turn it to the market. Just make it market based, because if you pay people for it, then they'll do it for you, and then it's okay. And so, my thought is, at what point is that just there's some coercion happening there? And in the case of like the Weinstein
Steen.
guy, or this
Harvey.
this Neil Gaiman question,
Yeah.
if he's way above in status, these women, and they think they're getting some kind of favor for him, it does change the incentives in a similar way that financial exchange changes the incentives. I don't know what to do with that from a legal standpoint, but you can say ethically that seems like they're not standing on even ground. If somebody's offering you $1 million so they can cut your arm,
Yep.
or give you Rohypnol, you're not making the same choice that you're making if you're standing there side by side them and they're saying, can I cut you? Because that would give me a jolly. Or can I, drug you? You're in a different sort of scenario now.
The reason why I thought Kat Rosenfield or Feld's article is interesting is just this, these kind of paragraphs, if you guys don't mind me reading, because it's investigating this power imbalance, but it's twofold. There's two sorts of power going on here. So Shapiro, who's the author of the hit piece or the investigative journalism that favors the abused or the victim of Neil's voracious appetite for weird stuff. Shapiro spends a lot of time thumbing the scales like this, and for good reason. Without the repeated reminders that sexual abuse is so confusing and hard to recognize, to the point where some victims go their whole lives mistaking a violent act for a consensual one, most readers would look at Pavlovich, the Neil's subject of his desires, Pavlovich behavior, including the "it was wonderful" text message, as well as her repeated and often aggressive sexual overtures toward Gaiman, and conclude that however she felt about the relationship later, her desire for him was genuine at the time, or at least that Gaiman could be forgiven for thinking it was. To make Pavlovich a more sympathetic protagonist and Gaiman a more persuasive villain, the article has to assert that her seemingly self-contradictory behavior is not just understandable, but reasonable, normal, typical. If Pavlovich lied and said a violent act was consensual and wonderful, that's just because women do be like that sometimes. To continue, obviously this paradigm imposes a very weird circular trap for men. Believe women, except the ones who say they want to sleep with you, in which case you should commence a Perrott-style interrogation until she breaks down and confesses that she actually finds you repulsive. But I'm more interested in what happens to women when they're cast in this role of society's unreliable narrators, so vulnerable to coercion and so socialized to please that even the slightest hint of pressure causes the instantaneous and irretrievable loss of their agency. And just one more paragraph, because this is where it gets really interesting. When you think about that and then you ratchet it out, this is a great narration from Kat. The thing is, if women can't be trusted to assert their desires or boundaries because they'll invariably lie about what they want in order to please other people, it's not just sex they can't reasonably consent to. It's medical treatments, car loans, nuclear non-proliferation agreements. Our entire social contract operates on the premise that adults are strong enough to choose their choices, no matter the ambient pressure from horny men or sleazy used car salesmen or power-hungry ayatollahs. If half the world's adult population are actually just small beings, there's a link I won't get to, hapless, helpless, fickle, fragile, and much too tender to perform even the most basic self-advocacy, everything starts to fall apart, including the entire feminist project. You can't have genuine equality for women while also letting them duck through the trapdoor of, but I didn't mean it, like children, when their choices have unhappy outcomes.
I
The
hate
article
this
goes on.
argument. I don't think it's good at all. I think it's a terrible argument.
Well, are you?
Oh, explain why.
Well, think about, first of all, the Ash conformity test. What was the percentage of subjects that were female versus male? I don't know what it
Could you
was,
speak
but
about this? We're beyond the
well,
depth.
this is one that a lot of people know about. That's why I'm bringing it up. And all the videos I've ever seen have been on male subjects. So I know that it's at least some of the subjects were male, if not all. I don't know. But the Ash line test was this test set up. It was a psychological experiment set up where there were a bunch of Confederates in the room that were in on the test and one test subject. And they were presented with a line of a certain length, whatever, I don't know where I'm coming in, like some length, and then a bunch of other lines, and they were to find the one in this other grouping that matched the first line, right? And almost everybody failed the test. The test was the Confederates, the people who were in on it, would all confidently identify a line that was obviously of a different length than the control, than the reference. When the individual looking could clearly see that line 3 or line C matches the reference, everybody's choosing line A, which is wildly different. And almost all of the subjects went along with group pressure and conformed to the group. This is not a male and female phenomenon. People are subject to all kinds of psychological pressures and make a lot of faulty decisions and come up with faulty perspectives based on a ton of different variables that are present in all of our social interactions day in, day out, all of our lives. Women, we can see that this has been a problem in our culture for maybe forever, but at least it's been really talked about very widely for a couple of decades now. What's the difference? This sexual thing is not some flaw with women where women are untrustworthy. We've had a breakdown in cultural values around sexual morality. We're still navigating this whole the technology of birth control that allows women to have sex like men without the consequence of pregnancy. The time that we're living in, which says that we should be engaging in this way, that it's cool to be this way, presents a whole quorum of new complex social dynamics that we're trying to navigate. If there is if this social problem of women revoking consent after the fact and claiming that this was bad for them when at the time they said it was fine, if this keeps happening, the logical response to that is not to say, wow, women are really unreliable and maybe we shouldn't trust them at all. Maybe we should talk about what we're doing with sex and sexual ethics in our culture that's causing this kind of response. Maybe that's it's the Occam's razor says it's not the women that are the problem, it's the sexual dynamics that are a problem for a number of men and women for these reasons. So that's why I hate that argument.
That's not Kat's argument.
What her argument there was that if women are not, you just read it, if women are not reliable here, then how can we rely on women to make decisions at all?
Kat is critiquing the framing of the previous article to cast the female in the role of victim and the male in the role of villain. And she's just following that logic through. So I think she's actually
Well, I'm
agreeing
not
with you.
arguing with then that's fine. Then I'm not arguing with Kat because I haven't read the whole article. I'm arguing with the argument that you just put out. I'm responding to an argument that you just read.
Yeah, that's the argument she's saying. So if we enshrine women as the victim and allow them to renege on their commitments, then how does that you just follow the logic through? Then they should
Mhm.
not be in any position of power, especially when they're dealing with power-hungry oligarchs or used car salesmen or horny men. They should be protected at all costs, which would go back to a more medieval, chastity-centered. We're going to put women up in, like Peter Pumpkin Eater. Had a wife and couldn't keep her, put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well, or whatever. Which in one reading is about a guy who had an unfaithful wife because he was so poor, and so he bought her a chastity belt. Rather than addressing, we had the really interesting argument about that because maybe she's the victim, maybe he's the victim. Burning your wife and putting her ashes into a pumpkin shell is probably the last course, and shows you to be a weak man insofar as you can't actually solve the relationship problem.
Well,
This is Benjamin Boyce, and welcome to Dead Air.
dead air. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you just told me that wasn't the argument, but I don't know. I don't know Kat's thesis in the whole thing because, as I said when we started, I read the first part of it.
Yeah.
But that argument that she is laying out in that paragraph, whether she goes on to argue against it or not, I just disagree that that's the logical conclusion of the premise.
The premise is that framing females as victims and not responsible for or being able to renege on their contractual, agreements in the past, even if we do that around sex, then it's going to follow that we could do that around legal matters, civil matters,
And I
and then
disagree
legal.
with that. I think you can be, you can, so something that's really interesting to me has been to read articles or listen to interviews with people who have left prostitution, with women who were former prostitutes, and that includes porn. So people who engaged in sex for money. And it's very interesting to see that at a certain point in this person's career, they're often really vocally in favor of this thing that they're doing. They're defending it. They think it's great. It's super liberating. It makes them feel powerful and desirable and affirms them in these ways. And then later on, you'll hear that same woman have a completely different take on it. Like, who's the one who did the really famous one? Deep Throat, right? Was the movie Linda Lovelace?
Linda
right?
Lovelace. Linda Lovelace.
So she's an example of this where at the time, this is great. This is living my best life. And then years later, that was rape. That was horrible. I was a complete victim of these coercive and pressure tactics by my husband. It was the worst thing ever. It ruined my life. So you hear these kinds of stories, and I think that to some degree both are true, because there's ways that we kind of lie to ourselves in the moment or convince ourselves to get on board with something that we're ambivalent about. And then, like you said, Jennifer, there's time, with time going on, we can look back on that and say, wow, that was a terrible decision. And now we have a different perspective on it. And so if you want to use the victim framework, we can do that. Maybe just because it's an easy word, it makes sense. But yeah, we can be victims of our own choices, of other people's pressures. And then we can find ourselves at a deficit because of decisions or actions that we made at an earlier point in our lives. And so maybe this is a particular way in which many women find themselves victimized. if you want to use that victim framework, which I don't know. I think that it's a little bit overplayed to some extent because of the Me Too thing and how people are a little bit fatigued with that sort of framing. But like or the book The Case Against the Sexual Revolution was such a good book, Louise Perry.
Louis Perry.
And she puts together this really strong case for how the sort of the sexual revolution, the easy access to sex, the no consequences for no apparent consequences in terms of pregnancy and childbirth for sexual behavior outside of committed relationships has opened up this expectation that women are going to be more freely engaging, more unrestrained. And it puts this pressure on all of us. It's kind of Jenny Holland. I love this phrase that she has used about the sexual arms race. Like, once something it becomes expected or acceptable, more and more people step up to that. And then to push the envelope, you have to step a little further. And then that brings everybody else a little bit further up with it. So I do think that there are a lot of social pressures that maybe are coming together to create situations where more women are giving more of themselves than they wish that they would have once they come back to a more balanced perspective or take a look at it retrospectively. I don't know. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think people do realize sometimes after the fact that they were engaged in something that was really unhealthy for them and that may have had dimensions of abuse. I don't know though that it always, it's a kind of separate issue though. Does that therefore mean that that person was, that it's a legal issue and that it can be prosecuted? I think that rises to a different level, but absolutely there's coercion of all types in relationships, and there's manipulation, and both on, women can manipulate men into extremely unhealthy destructive relationships as well. There's definitely coercion, and manipulation, and people get into situations that turn out to be extremely harmful to them. And I think we don't like to acknowledge the level of power that people have over one another. We like to think that, we can really just sort of remain less affected by people than what we are. But the truth is, we are extremely affected by people, and that's why it's so important how we treat one another.
How do you protect people from making bad choices?
I don't know that you can protect people from making bad choices. I mean, I think the whole thing about free will, I think we have free will, but we don't have unfettered free will. I think we have free will to the extent which we're conscious. So the more conscious we are and the more we understand ourselves and our motivations and our particular very unique vulnerabilities, the more likely we are to make good choices for ourselves. But I still make bad choices for myself sometimes, and
What'd you have for breakfast?
I'm 57. All I've had for breakfast today is a slice of cheese and 4 low salt Triscuits.
Okay,
That's all I've eaten all day.
doesn't sound like a bad choice. You could probably have a
It's not bad,
slab
but
of
it's
ham.
not enough food.
Yeah.
It's not enough food.
Yeah. Well, I think
Caravaggio. Can I respond to a couple chats, Benjamin?
Yep.
Caravaggio says disparity in male/female psychology, very interesting discourse. And then Student of Rhythm says there's also such a thing as repentance, as in I did the thing, I thought it was what I wanted. Now I see it was wrong and I renounce it.
Mm-hmm.
And Georgina Whidbey says it just jumped. There needs to be a group level ethics/morality to reinforce that some things should never be for sale, some rights unalienable. Okay.
Group level, is that not collectivism? Is that not identity politic?
You know what I wonder? It's you were saying. I liked this conversation that you were introducing earlier, where you're talking about how as the person interacting with another in a state of connection, empathy, for the sake of listening or reflecting with that person on themselves. You talk about this as an interview, but also as a counselor, as a coach, as somebody who's working closely with another person, the framing, the non-judgmental receptiveness of the person that you're talking to is really helpful for having a person feel like they can open up and discuss something. And then Jennifer's like, I love that what you said. It's like you can tell your friend, no, that's fucked up. You can, but there's a difference between a judgment of the thing and a judgment of the person. And if a person feels like they can come to you and you're gonna hear them with acceptance, even if you judge the thing that they tell you, like, wow, you did that, huh? That I could see how that would really be a disaster for you, or how do you feel about that? You're really getting yourself in a tight spot with this thing, there's an openness to the fact that somebody might tell you something crazy or something really beyond the pale, something that's this wild thing, and you have to just be able to sit there and hear it and contain it with them when you're in certain roles. And that's different than what you said, Jennifer, about being like therapizing the whole society, which is what we have when we have cultural authorities like teachers, like the people who are teaching human sexuality courses to graduate students in psychology, like these sort of leaders on how to live a life are up there promoting the queering of everything. And so when I'm seeing what Georgina Woodby says, I'm thinking that the cultural moral authorities, parents, educators, etc., should be promoting a framework that aims towards human flourishing, that sort of create, like, what's wrong with having that path that you talked about, Benjamin? What's wrong with having a reference path of something that looks like successful happiness? And then if people want to deviate from that, then the consequences are whatever consequences fall out for them and the way that people feel about that. But it's not to reinforce something in a rigid legalistic way, but it is what's wrong with presenting some kind of a moral compass.
I have two things to say. The first is to answer a question that came into my mind this weekend about the phrase "beyond the pale," and I thought sometimes
did you find out what it means?
Where does that come from? The phrase "beyond the pale," and this is from Google. The phrase "beyond the pale" means something is unacceptable, improper, or outside the limits of what is acceptable. It can also refer to something that is offensive or lacks propriety. The phrase's origins are unclear, but it's often associated with the Pale in Ireland. The Pale was a region in Ireland where English settlers lived under the protection of the Crown. The area outside the Pale was considered lawless and uncivilized. So beyond the Pale there's civilized society, and then there's that which is barbaric beyond it. That was the one thing that I wanted to say, because it wasn't about going to a tanning booth one too many times.
So then it's about like having a set of agreed upon norms. That's what civilization is. It's like we live under these norms. And so if you're outside of that, so that just emphasizes the need to have that reference point. Okay.
Yeah, and then you get into the whole prodigal son territory. It's like, okay, well, here's civilization, but because we're human beings, you can violate from this reservation at any time. Go forth and, well, it's interesting. In England, there's a woman who had sexual intercourse with 100 men in one day. I don't remember her name. It was a big bust up because there was a guy followed her around and made a video about her, and it looked like she was very filled with disgust for that behavior. And then now she's going on to try to attempt to sleep with 1,000 men in a single day. And she's going around basically encouraging this behavior. She's really making a lot of money off of it. There's some questions about why her parents are involved financially with this endeavor, keeping her books and stuff like that. And then in Turkey, the other day, it came about that a woman, OnlyFans proprietress, attempted to do the same thing and sleep with 100 men in a single day. And she was summarily arrested, put in prison, because that government will not allow that behavior. So it's interesting to see more traditional sorts of law. And then if you want to go all the way to Pakistani gang rapes and stuff like that, that's another conversation. But you do have these different ways of dispensing with justice, upholding either honor, for the clan or for the group, and or protecting civilization, protecting the pale from that which is beyond it, by casting people out of it or imprisoning people who try to bring that which is beyond the pale into the pale. There's that way of behaving. I had a dream this morning. It was a really interesting dream. Jesus was walking around, and there was these two groups of people who were warring against each other. And my imagination just said, okay, well, there's the Palestinians and there's the Israelis, and they're at war. And Jesus was kind of walking around, and he looked kind of strange from far away. I was like, is that Jesus? He just looked kind of unattractive and kind of like less than normal. He wasn't even a normal guy. He was kind of like, his head was kind of weird and stuff. And he met somebody who was carrying a bomb from the Palestinians over to the Israelis, and the bomb was hidden in a suitcase, a wheelie suitcase. And they had a brief conversation, and the guy was going to walk on, and Jesus was like, oh, you forgot your package. And then I was standing next to Jesus, and like right away I was standing next to Jesus, and there's this young woman saying, why did you give that? You knew that was a bomb. Why did you give the bomb to the guy to go and destroy these other people? And Jesus said, and this is my dream, Jesus said something very interesting. And I can't remember exactly what he said, and I wish I would have wrote it down, but he said, I love all as you love yours. Like, you're protecting your brethren from their enemies, but I love them all. And I was standing in front of Jesus at this moment, and I felt myself change from a kind of being a normal human being to being very tall. I felt very tall. I didn't stretch above the horizon, but I felt inside of myself a connection to some sort of depth of perception or height of perception that is based on a connection with the human being that somehow contradicts the laws of civilization, right? Don't kill other people, right? It's no longer an eye for an eye, right? Like there's those tenets, there's those moralities that in effect, I have to defend my clan from my enemy's clan. I have to do that. But Jesus commands me to love my neighbor. And you're like, well, why? Or love my enemy as you love yourself, like love your enemy. And there was something about his perspective and the way that I felt in front of him that transcended those phrases, where I saw this human that's more than human, calling us to be more human than human, calling us to recognize each other as human beings in a way that is beyond protecting and beyond moralizing and beyond, protecting the pale from that which is outside the pale. It was a very interesting kind of perspective. And I think I've been learning that lately in my relationships, where, like I get into a tight spot. I deal with difficult children, not your children, Leslie, other children, because I deal with difficult children, and you see like they are just being really, really difficult. And I see my anger come up and like be right there to like tell them off or put them in their place. And I just kind of watch the anger come up, and I'm like, I'm gonna connect with them in another vector. I'm gonna connect with them in another vector, human to human, and give a little bit of space in this intense interaction. And I see that, I've seen that since I've been working with children forever, is that the thing about being an adult is not to go to the child's level, but to lift the child to your level. And I brought up this in my show before, where when I have witnessed a child be hurt, they scrape their knee. And I worked with a lot of women, and it probably has nothing to do with them being women, but I worked in daycare with a lot of women. It's like 99% women. And they would go and they would coddle the child and give them a lot of attention and give them a lot of love and hush them down and like overwhelm them with a positive regard. And I found myself, when encountering the same situation where a child comes to me in a state of distress, not overwhelming their distress, but connecting with them through their distress, connecting with that which is witnessing their distress, not that which is reacting to the distress, and not the distress itself. Yeah, you're hurt. Yeah, this is really bad. How does it make you, and not having a conversation, but looking into their eyes until they kind of sober up in a way, and they look at it, and usually a scraped knee, as soon as you look at the knee and you're no longer shocked, the pain is very minuscule. A lot of the pain that we experience is rather minuscule compared to our ability to witness it. And And so I'm when we get to issues such as, well, let's just go back to Neil Gaiman and this woman. The reason that article, well, there's a lot of different interesting aspects to the story. It's like this guy was a male feminist. He was about believe all women and like protect all women and like adulating all women. And he was a total, exactly what a male feminist turns out to be time and time again. He's a predator. He's a predator that's dressing up. He's doing some sort of strategy to protect himself. And while he predates on that which he's ostensibly lifting up and supporting. But then there's also the public opinion. Well, we need somebody to shame. Like, this is really shameful behavior. So we need to cast him as the villain and this person as a victim. But you're like, well, why do we need to do either? And if we are going to do that, then should we not shame the woman too and say, this is shameful behavior? Now you made a mistake. You were younger. He made a mistake. He's older. So there's different levels of accountability, or one would suppose responsibility for that behavior, but you're both tied to your behavior. You both made these decisions, and these decisions are wrong. And we don't accept this behavior. This is disgusting, vile behavior. And women who participate in this behavior shouldn't be adulated for that behavior, and men shouldn't be either, but we condemn the behavior. We always open up to redemption. But the path towards redemption isn't necessarily forgiveness and the exception or the nullification of shame. But maintaining the ability to shame someone and love someone is a huge stretch. It's a huge evolutionary or developmental leap to do. But I think as adults, that's what we're called to do. As Christians, if you want to go that way, like the vision that I had of Jesus, or the dream I had of Jesus, wasn't this God in man form. It was this man in man form, like this more human than human. He wasn't a deity at all. He was just the biggest one on the block, and in this very subtle way, in this much deeper realm of power and prestige that there's not a lot of truck of that in society at large. End rant.
Very interesting rant.
This is Benjamin Boyce, and welcome to Dead Air.
Dead air. Yeah, that's. I think people. There's an assumption of black and white thinking that I'm hearing. Like, we shouldn't just see this woman as a victim. We should also hold her responsible. But don't we? I mean, don't you, when you read that story and you see that she was engaged in, like, whatever, eating feces or whatever it was, don't you think, if you didn't, why would you let somebody get you to that point? Don't do that. This is a cautionary tale for anybody who's being so agreeable or so easily manipulated. Like, look at this. Do not do this. Do not allow people to take you to these extremes in things that you would be later on, that you would regret like that. And that goes for anything even less extreme. Like, don't just stand strong and try to withstand that pressure. It's similar to talking about the Asch conformity test. When we see that, we can recognize the human tendencies to be manipulated or to be to go along, to get along, to do the conformist thing. But we also, you can empathize with that human tendency to do that while still watching it and reasserting your own strength and saying, I hope I wouldn't do that if I were presented with a similar challenge. So watching these kinds of stories presents a cautionary tale as much as it presents fodder for judgment. Dead air.
Well, it's actually time, because you guys keep a very tight 1 hour stream, and we are now at the hour mark. So let's plug our work. Jennifer, where can people get in contact with you so that their heads might be shrunken in your fashion? Or do you not advertise that on your stream? What do you guys
I
normally
don't, but
advertise?
I certainly can. They can look me up on Psychology Today, and all of the information is right there. If you go to Psychology Today, find a therapist. I
Jennifer
am on there
Friend.
with a very old picture that I'm too lazy to change. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, and if you're interested in Solid Ground, you can find us at solidgroundsupport.com. And we host weekly groups for discussions that are actually a lot like the discussions we have on our live stream, just with more people. Sometimes our groups are small, sometimes they're a little bit bigger. I'd say my groups are usually 5 to 8 people every week in my Thursday group. And they're really great discussions. We talk about all kinds of things, anything can come up, and people get to know each other really well. And it's a great and lively and deep space for engagement. And there are currently 4 groups a week. So we're looking to add. So we have in February we have our first ever media discussion group. We want to start doing those every 4 to 6 weeks, and we are going to be discussing the movie Wicked,
Oh,
which
cool.
I hope you'll come with me, Benjamin, and
Oh,
discuss
yeah.
Wicked, so you can
Well,
let
do I
everybody
have
know
to
how much
rewatch
you
it?
loved it. No,
I don't know. Okay. Well, if we
no.
do Wicked, then we'll have to do Blood Meridian. As a
Oh, really?
tit for
Oh,
tat.
okay. Well, maybe so.
Yeah, I'm Benjamin Boyce, and this is my wife, Leslie Elliott Boyce. You can find her at the Radical Center on YouTube and on Twitter at J Leslie Elliott, and myself at Benjamin A. Boyce. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you guys don't make terrible decisions. If somebody asks you to lick up your own vomit, just say no. It's
I
not worth
know.
it.
That's one decision I do not worry about making.
Okay, well, there we go.
That is beyond the pale for me. So I'm good.
Good. Nice to know you have some boundaries there, Jennifer.
I've established that.
Right, excellent. Well, c'est la vie.